Lion in the Wind. Chapter 8. Black took a bite of egg and washed it down with some juice as he read the morning paper. He then smiled as he glanced at one of the headlines. I see the General Secretary has gone on the warpath with his cabinet over their, shall we say, indiscretions? As he sliced off a small piece of the steak on his plate, Elgar strode into the room holding a folder under his arm. "Ah, the morning briefing," said Black happily as Elgar handed him the folder. Black flipped it open, began to read the first page, stopped, backed up, and then read it again. He scratched his chin as he studied the page in curiosity. Interesting. So our robotic friend is now taking up the study of warcraft. I wonder what prompted him to do that, he said, more to himself than to Elgar. The report says that his interest is more generic than specific. It's possible that he may have heard something about the upcoming war and became curious, said Elgar. Well, that's possible. But if that were true, wouldn't he be focusing more on data relevant to the Gorg rather than war in general? I don't know, sir. I am just as confused as you are by his actions, and hoping you might be able to make something of it, said Elgar. I would, but nothing really jumps out at me at this point, said Black. He flipped through the other pages, reading each of them quickly, and then set the folder down on the table. He leaned back in his chair and pondered the information. After a bit, he turned to Elgar and said, "Let's keep an eye on him for a while. I want to see what he intends to do with this new line of study. It may turn out to be nothing and, at the same time, it could prove to be of great benefit to us." Persia walked up behind Tegani as the first light of dawn broke over the distant horizon. "You're up early," she said as she sat down beside him. "I do not require rest," said Tegani. Persia chuckled. "Maybe not, but I'm sure you were at least doing something while the rest of us were sleeping." "I've been thinking." "About what?" asked Persia. "Death." Persia's eyes widened as she giggled slightly. "Well, that's an awfully heavy subject to be thinking about this early in the morning." He turned to her and asked, "Does death bring you laughter?" Persia blinked in surprise. "No, it doesn't." "Then why did you laugh?" "I was just caught off guard by your strange interest in death, and found it funny. Death is not a subject of joy or laughter." "Your actions, however, were," she said with a muted grin. Tegani lifted his head and stared at the sky. "I see." Persia studied Tegani's expression, but couldn't make much from his otherwise blank stare. "Is something on your mind?" she asked. Tegani remained silent for several moments, and then said, "I am trying to understand death. Why must it happen, and what is its purpose? I understand the physical and biological reality of death, and why it occurs, but I do not understand the wide range of religious and philosophical elements that are attached to it." Persia blinked in surprise. "You really have been thinking about this, haven't you?" she said with a chuckle. Tegani turned to her with a puzzled expression. "I already stated that I have been." "Was the original statement not understood?" Persia laughed. No. I fully understood you. I was just being sarcastic." Tegani turned his face to the horizon. "Sarcasm? He briefly reviewed several things in his mind before returning to the subject of death, again trying to understand it. But nothing made sense to him. He then turned to Persia and asked, "Why do living things die?" Persia took a deep breath. "It's just the natural order of things. We live, and when the time comes, be that tomorrow or many years from now, we die. So this cessation of function is a normal part of life?" Persia nodded. "It is." "Will I cease to function someday?" asked Tegani. Persia nodded again. "It may take many of our lifetimes, but eventually you will. Everything dies. Even machines. But a machine is not alive. How can it die if it was never alive?" Persia pondered the question for a while, and then said, "Actually, in a way you are alive. While you're not flesh and blood like me, you're still a living creature." "Why am I considered alive?" "Because you can think and reason for yourself. Life is more than just being made of organic material. It's a state of existence as well. Then a clock is alive? Persia shook her head. No, it's not, because it cannot think for itself. Neither can bacteria, and yet they are considered alive. This impressed Persia. Despite being a robot, Tegani was surprisingly observant and insightful. She then lay down on the ground and stared out at the prairie as she thought about an answer to Tegani's statement. Well, you're right in a way. Life is something much larger than can be defined by words. Explain. She rolled onto her back and looked at Tegani. To use your more logical way of thinking, life can be defined in two ways. The first is biological existence. Plants, trees, bacteria, and even myself would fall into this category. The other form of life would revolve around sentience and being aware of oneself, the latter of which doesn't necessarily require biological materials to exist. But you are both sentient and biological. Are you then of both types? Persia nodded slightly. In many ways, I am. There's almost always a middle ground for everything in this world where the distinctiveness of several different things becomes blended together to create yet another type that is both similar and yet distinct from the others. Like a hybrid? Persia shrugged slightly as she thought about the question. Yeah, in a way. Then what is the true definition of death, if life has many definitions? Persia squirmed slightly at the question. She inhaled deeply, and then exhaled slowly. Well, I don't completely understand it myself, but Dad once told me that, when we die, our souls leave our bodies and go to be with Mashwa. I don't quite understand what a soul is, but it's apparently a fairly important part of us. Tegani pondered this briefly. Is this soul immortal, or does it die as well? He asked. Persia sighed. As far as I know, it's immortal. Then will your soul ever return to this world and live again? A sad expression drew across her face. No, it won't. Tegani raised an eyebrow in interest. Then death is permanent. It is. Tegani pondered this for several moments, and then started walking back to the lab. Where are you going? Asked Persia. I want to better understand what death is. Delgra hurried out of his office as he straightened his uniform. Why didn't someone tell me he was coming? He asked. Nobody knew until just a few minutes ago, sir, replied Silvers. Delgra grumbled. I hate surprise inspections. As he hurried out the front door, a small caravan of black vehicles pulled to a stop in front of the building. Delgra paused at the top of the steps and studied each of the vehicles. Numerous men in black suits, shoulder cloaks and dark glasses quickly piled out of the escort vehicles and surveyed the area for danger while others guarded the vehicles. Satisfied that all was safe, one of the men walked over to one of the vehicles and opened the door. The general secretary stepped out a moment later. Delgra walked down the steps and saluted him. Good morning, sir. For what do we have the pleasure of your visit? He asked. It has come to my attention that you've been doing some rather interesting things behind our backs as of late, replied the general secretary. Delgra's heart froze. While he maintained his stern military repose on the outside, his heart beat feverishly inside his chest. How did he find out? He thought. Come again, sir, he said, trying to maintain an air of innocence. I've read all about your work here these past 2 years and wanted to personally congratulate you on a job well done, said the general secretary. Delgra's mind went from fear to complete puzzlement. For what, sir? Your work in secretly preparing the military for war, of course. It would seem that your former commander did not value your vast array of skills. For example, hacking into our computer network and creating 3 fake personnel files, each one a marshal general, complete with military history, and all necessary data to fool the lower-level commanders into doing what needed to be done. Utterly brilliant. In fact, your work was so good that it even fooled our best security experts, said the general secretary with a chuckle. Delgra scolded himself harshly. Drat. I was sloppy and got caught. But how'd they catch me? He thought to himself. How long have you known about this, sir? He asked. Just a few days, actually. You did a good enough job covering your tracks that it took a senator's as yet unknown informant to discover your work. I must say that your work does great credit to the branch of special operations. Thank you, sir, said Delgra. The general secretary pulled a large folder from his briefcase and handed it to Delgra. I'd like you to look this over and give me your opinion of the items in it, he said. Delgra opened the folder and glanced through it briefly. They're new weapon systems we might be able to use against the Gorg. Since we'll be heavily outnumbered in this fight, we'll need to find anything we can that'll give us an edge. I'm no military expert, so I'll be relying on your knowledge and experience to determine which of these systems will give us what we need, said the general secretary. I'll get right on it, sir, said Delgra. The general secretary turned around and scanned the facility. And while I'm here, I think I'd like a tour of the place. From what I've seen, you run a tight little operation. Yes, sir, we do. If you'd like, the general secretary waved dismissively. No, no, no. You've got more important work to do. In fact, you should probably get started on it right now. Your executive officer here knows the facility well enough, doesn't he? Like the back of my hand, sir, said Silvers proudly. Very good. Then he can show me the facility while you get to work. Delgra saluted him and said, Understood, sir. He then turned and walked back into the administration building. He quickly called up a secure voice connection on his computer and waited for the other side to answer. Black here, came the reply. The general secretary knows about our plans. Yes, I know. What are we going to do about it? We're going to continue just as we have been. But he knows already. Major, we are less than a year away from the start of the war. It was time he knew. Delgra stared at the screen in bewilderment. You told him? Yes, in a way. I used one of my government contacts to insert the information into circulation at the right time to reveal only what they needed to know, and nothing more. Delgra sighed. I wish you'd warn me when you do stuff like this. I hate surprises. Black chuckled. My apologies. But I did at least tell you that I'd be sending some information your way. Yes, but you failed to mention the means by which it'd be delivered, said Delgra incredulously. Black chuckled. Again, my apologies. By the way, did you receive the folder I sent you? He asked. Delgra raised an eyebrow in curiosity. What folder? A folder with detailed information about a set of potential new weapon systems that I wanted you to look at. It should have come with the general secretary today. Did he not hand it to you? Delgra looked down at the folder on his desk. Yes, he did, he replied. Good. I would like you to flip through it until you find a paper on a robotic lion. Delgra opened the folder and searched each page until he found the one Black had described. Tegani Project? Is this the robot you showed me a few days ago? He asked. Black gave a soft, but evil-sounding laugh. Yes, it is. But that was only the appetizer. This folder contains the main course. Look it over and familiarize yourself with it. I think you will find this particular weapon to be quite interesting. Delgra continued to read the informational pages, but said nothing. Sensing that Delgra was otherwise occupied, Black said, I will leave the rest of this up to you. Good day, Major, and then disconnected the call. Delgra continued to study the papers with great interest for several minutes longer, and then set them aside and turned to his computer. Within moments, new orders were flowing over the internet to all parts of the country. Bergen walked into his laboratory and was surprised to find Tegani discussing biological reproduction with Persia. Bergen grinned wide as he watched Persia's expressions change from shock to embarrassment to confusion and back again. He mused about Persia's seeming inability to handle the subject, and then wondered how red her face was below her fur. Finally, deciding it was best to step in and rescue her before she exploded from sheer embarrassment, he walked up and greeted Tegani. Good morning, Tegani. How are you doing today? He asked. I am having a fascinating discussion on the reproductive functions and habits of various life forms found on this planet. Oh really, said Bergen with a grin. Dad. Do something, said Persia insistently through gritted teeth. Tegani, can we change the subject? Asked Bergen. Yes, father. What new subject did you wish to discuss? Bergen sat down on a stool next to him, and said, What do you know about war? I have considerable knowledge on the subject. Is there something you wish to know? Bergen sighed. Read this, he said as he held out a single sheet of paper. Tegani glanced at it, and then looked curiously at Bergen. So this is what he was talking about, said Tegani. Who was? Asked Bergen. Mashwa, replied Tegani. Bergen looked at him in confusion. What are you talking about? He asked. Persia quickly read the paper as well and then went wide-eyed. Dad, is this for real? She said in surprise. Bergen nodded. I'm afraid so. I don't know why they'd want him for military service, or even how they found out about him. All I know so far is who to report to, where, and when. Dad, not to sound silly, but since when do they recruit machines? Asked Persia. Bergen shrugged. I don't know. This is a first for me as well. But we'll find out together. Together? I would assume by that statement that you've received orders as well, said Tegani in interest. Bergen nodded. Persia blinked in surprise. Wait, you're going too, she exclaimed. And you as well. Me, said Persia. Bergen grinned. Well, we can't leave you here alone, now can we? Persia thought about this for a moment, and said, well, no, not really. Father, what is the nature of your summons? I would suspect that it is not for military service as you are beyond the age of enlistment or military draft, said Tegani. That's correct. You have been summoned for military service, and I, being your creator, am required to be there with you as chief supervising scientist. What about me? What's my purpose there? Asked Persia. Family pet, chided Bergen with a grin. Dad. That's not funny, said Persia as she nudged him playfully with her paw. Since we will need to travel soon, would you like me to arrange transportation for us? That's already been taken care of, said Bergen. Tegani nodded. Understood. Bergen stood up and then walked over to his desk. Well, I think it's time to go home and start packing. The sooner we get where we're going, the better. At least, in theory, anyways. Wait, Dad. Aren't you going to contest this? Tegani can't go into the military. He hasn't even completed his training with us yet, said Persia. I can't do anything to stop it. It's a federal order. They ask, we do. We can't say no. There are actually 127 different legal precedents that could be used to render such an order null and void, said Tegani. Well, let's not. While I agree with Persia that you aren't quite ready for something like this, I have a feeling that some good might come of this. Besides, if you do well, it gives more strength to my case for robotic sentience. Is your boss okay with this? Asked Persia. You mean Mr. Black? Asked Bergen. Persia nodded. Bergen shrugged. He's the one who gave me the paper and arranged our transportation. So I would think so. Now, let's get packing. I don't want to miss the train.